Lumber prices have been falling dramatically over the past couple of months, and in this video we're going to talk about how those lumber prices even got up to the level that they were, and how does this correlate to the housing market and what does it do. We're also going to talk about where those lumber prices are going to bottom out. So if this is something that is interesting to you and you want to know more about, then this video is for you, so make sure that you stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Jared Allison with JDA Florida Homes, and I'm a real estate agent here in the state of Florida. So I follow the market pretty closely. That way I can keep my clients that I'm working with informed about the housing market data and the latest trends for the housing market. What we're going to talk about today is lumber prices and how that directly affects or indirectly affects the housing market. And in order to get a full understanding of why these lumber prices increased so dramatically and then why they are decreasing so dramatically, we have to look at a chart and go back to right when the COVID-19 was starting to show itself here in the US. So let's jump into a chart and just take a quick look at the historical data going back to February of last year. So what we see is the pandemic warnings begin back in March and April timeframe of last year, and we didn't really see an increase in the lumber pricing until June of last year, where it hit a peak on August 21st of $831. Now what that means, that price point is the price per 1,000 board feet. That's what the lumber futures are, and that's how they are referenced. So then continuing on, we don't see that other price increase. It dropped down a little bit after August, and we'll talk about why it dropped back off. But then we started seeing that dramatic increase all the way up to where we saw it peak out on May 7th at $1,670 before it started dropping back off. And we've had a really dramatic decline in the lumber futures prices since then, and we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about why this happened. So there were several reasons why the lumber prices increased the way they did, and there's an article here that I'm going to show you on theadvocate.com. It says lumber mills were shut down in the early days of the pandemic for a variety of reasons. Some states didn't classify the lumber industry as an essential business, which meant employees were required to stay at home. Other mills shut down because of economic uncertainty because home building dropped sharply in March and April. So what this means is that the lumber mills were shutting down for a few reasons. One of those reasons is because of COVID-19 and the stay-at-home orders and the fact that they weren't considered an essential business, so therefore the employees were not actually allowed to come to work. The other reason is some of the lumber mills actually saw and forecasted a decline in the new build industry, and let me pull that chart up real quick. And what we can see here is this chart here is from Fred Economic Data, and it goes back to August 2018. It actually goes back further than that, but I have it back to just 2018. So we can see it was pretty steady until it peaks out right here in February and then has a sharp decline in March and April. So the lumber mills saw this and were projecting a even deeper decline of new builds. So therefore they said, we're just going to shut down. We're going to make sure that everything is sanitary and there's no reason for us to open back up. What happened was, let's jump back into that chart real quick, and we can see that here in April is where it bottomed out, and then it started increasing again. So what happened is the builders actually got a little nervous during the beginning parts of the pandemic, and they started to shut down. And then after things kind of settled down a little bit, they said, well, hey, we can still go out and build homes, so let's go do that. And then they started buying up all the lumber to keep up with their contracts and neighborhoods that they're building and everything like that. So what's going to happen? You're going to have a shortage of lumber, which is one of the reasons that led to that first peak on this chart. So on August 21st of last year, the price peaked out right around $831 before it started going back down. And there's a couple of reasons why it was going back down. Number one was the autumn season. The fall season is a typical slow time for the lumber mills, and there's not as much demand during that time. So therefore, if you look at historical data, you'll see during the fall seasons where the prices tend to dip just a little bit. However, there were some other things that played a factor. One of those was the National Association of Home Builders urging the White House to remove or lessen some of those tariffs that are put on the wood that we actually purchase from Canada. So let me pop up a couple more articles. And this one from Business Insider just talks about, it says the USA purchases approximately 65% of Canada's dimension lumber production, mostly for home construction framing. And then if we jump over to another article from the NAHB, it actually says the NAHB urged the White House to call on domestic lumber producers to ramp up production to ease growing shortages and to make it a priority to work with Canada on a new softwood lumber agreement that would end tariffs averaging more than 20% on Canadian lumber shipments into the United States that are increasing the price volatility. A similar message was sent to the U.S. Lumber Coalition with a request to work together to address shortages in the lumber supply chain caused in part to the COVID-19 pandemic. So there were a couple of reasons and things that happened that caused the lumber prices to decline last year after that August peak. However, it did start going back up right about the October timeframe, mid-October, and then we started seeing a little bit more increase, and that was because the home builders were starting to ramp up. But also we have to think about all the stay-at-home orders that were going on being issued by the local governments. So now employees were no longer going to work, they're staying at home. So when you're staying at home, you've got a lot of projects to do. So we had an influx of the DIYers, the do-it-yourselfers that had projects that they've been putting off, and now they have the time to do it. So these DIYers are running out to the big box stores and buying up lumber to build sheds, to build decks, to build whatever they need. So that was an unexpected increase in demand from the lumber mills, which in turn drove the shortage even deeper and caused those prices to continue to increase all the way up until they peaked out right there about May 7th, 2021. Just a couple of months ago, it hit $1,670. Now, there are several reasons why the lumber prices increased the way they did starting at the beginning of this year, peaking out in May, just as we saw. And one of those reasons is because the new build homes were starting to ramp up. The builders were ramping up, building, catching up on contracts. So therefore, they're buying huge amounts of lumber in order to make sure that they have enough to do what they need to do. The other thing we haven't really thought about or talked about is the fact that all these these employees are now staying home. The ones that used to go to work every day are now working from home, so they have a lot more time to complete a lot of these do-it-yourself projects, such as building a shed out back, building a back deck, or building, whatever you need. They're running off to the big box stores and they're buying up all this plywood, all this lumber in order to complete their projects. So we saw a huge influx of the DIY projects being completed, and that further drove that lumber shortage, which kept pushing that price higher and higher until it finally peaked out in May. And then there's an article that kind of talks about that. Let me put that up on the screen. This article is from fortune.com. As lumber prices got exorbitantly high this spring, home builders and DIYers finally started to back off. In May, new home construction and home improvement sales were down 8.8% and 8.1% respectively from their March highs. On the supply side, meanwhile, sawmills, incentivized by record high prices, upped their production levels. That combination of increased supply and weakening demand is helping to alleviate the lumber shortage. So going back into the beginning of this year, we had a huge influx of home builders that are now trying to meet their contract deadlines to build homes. So they're buying up a huge amount of wood and further driving the shortage even deeper. And number two, we have all the DIYers, the employees that used to be going to work are now working from home, and they're going out to the big box stores and buying up a bunch of wood to complete those home projects that they've been putting off for however long and they want to get it done. So as the article said, it peaks out in May. The home builders and the DIYers decide the wood is just too expensive now, so they're going to back off, which causes those lumber prices to begin to decline, as we're seeing right now. This other article from NBCnews.com says experts say they predict lumber prices will continue to slowly ease, settling at the $500 or $600 level by this fall as mills add new shifts and find additional employees. So now that we know what happened to the lumber prices and why they increased and decreased as much as they did, we want to see how does that correlate over to the housing market. And there's an article that I'm going to put up here for you real quick, and it's from bankrate.com. The biggest factor is supply and demand. The US population, and particularly the generational bulge of millennials entering their 30s and starting households, is growing faster than the number of homes available. That means even as wood prices come back to earth, home prices are unlikely to follow. So in the housing market, there's still a huge shortage of inventory right now in the state of Florida. We're at about a 1.1 month supply, so we're still in that extreme seller's market, and in some particular counties we are even less than a 1 month supply of homes for sale. So that shortage, that supply and demand, is what has been driving those home prices to increase the way that they do. And I'm going to dive more into that in my next video, talking about the housing market trends for the state of Florida and various counties through Florida. So if you're interested in that, look for that video coming out here in the next couple of days. I appreciate you watching this video, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave those down below. And if you really enjoyed this video, hit the like button on there. And if you want to see more videos like the one I have upcoming about the housing trends and the housing market, hit that subscribe button and hit the alert bell, so that way you are notified when I release new videos. Again, my name is Jared Allison. I'm a real estate agent here in the state of Florida. If you have any real estate needs, feel free to reach out, leave a comment down below. Let's talk about real estate. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. See ya.
You ain't seen nothing like this.